All right, so we're getting ready to start Unit 5, Evolution, and this is Lesson 1. So what should you hope to understand from this unit? Well, first, the biggest umbrella concept is all organisms come from a common ancestor. And with that, the DNA of a species changes slowly over time in response to environmental factors. And the reason why the DNA changes is because species either adapt to the changes in the environment and then they pass those traits on to their offspring, or they don't adapt and they wind up becoming extinct. Fossils and organism similarities offer proof of the theory of evolution. And classification is used to organize the vast number of species in existence as a result of evolution. So we have a way to classify organisms according to class, genus, and species. So with every unit we have some critical vocabulary. Your first vocabulary quiz is going to be on March 16th. March 16th. That's a Monday, so that's this coming Monday. You're going to have a vocabulary quiz on the first 7. And then you're going to have another vocabulary quiz on March 23rd. And then actually we're going to have another vocabulary quiz right at the end of that week before we go on spring break. And that's going to be 3/27. So you're going to want to prepare for this one and then take the next couple of days to study for the last one. So this way we get all the important vocabulary taken care of before you go on spring break. So what do we call things or species that have similar species or same structures? Here you can see that the whale, the frog, horse, human, bat, all have the same structure here. These are called homologous structures. It's actually one of your vocabulary words. And basically what it means is similar structures in distantly related species. And then we have something called comparative anatomy. And here you see different types of structures. Some of them are probably no longer useful. So what do we call these structures that we don't really need anymore or that we have no use for? They are called vestigial, which is another vocabulary word. Vestigial structures. And why do we have them? So I'm going to put this right here. Because their common ancestor must have needed them at some point. So we have these So for example, with humans, tailbone and appendix are two popular examples. We don't need our appendix. A lot of people have problems with their appendix. They have it removed and they go on and they're just fine. And then we have something called comparative biochemistry. We all have the same chemical makeup. So, all organisms. Move this up a little. Have A paired with T and C paired with G in their DNA, which we just learned in the last unit. Also, all organisms have the elements phosphorus, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, and hydrogen. And then we have something called comparative embryology. So these are all reasons or ways in which organisms are similar to one another. Same structures, comparative anatomy, comparative biochemistry, and now we have comparative embryology. Similarities in embryos. Let's look at the man, the pig, the reptile, and the bird. You can see in the developmental stages, they look really, really similar. So what this means is that embryos of distantly related species have a similar look. So you see all these different types of similarities that we just talked about. So that begs the question, why are there so many similarities in different types of organisms? Well, one theory is maybe we came from a common ancestor who changed little by little to adjust to the environment. So to test that theory, let's look at the fossil record of a horse and a man. So let's define fossil, which is remains of an organism preserved over time. So let's look at the horse. On the bottom, we have the early horse. So we've got the Eohippus, then the Mesohippus, then the Maryhippus, and the Picohippus, and then the Equus. So you can see how the horse has changed over time. And then let's look also over here of skulls of early and modern man. Here we have African ape man, Java ape man, Neanderthal man, Cro-Magnon, and then modern man. And the spelling got chopped off on your papers. Evidence for these changes. It says the diagram above shows the changes over time. I think the O got cut off too in a horse. So evidence for these changes most likely came from where? Well, fossils, because the fossils show the small changes from simple to complex over time. And that is the true evidence of evolution, looking at these fossils. Second question is, how do these small changes shown by fossil evidence come about? So why does evolution happen? Well, Charles Darwin believed that evolution occurs because of the basic process of natural selection. So now we have to define what natural selection is. And I'm sorry, I've continued on to page 8. You have an activity that you're going to be doing in between, but in case you're trying to figure out where I am, I'm on page 8. So natural refers to the environment, and selection refers to changes. So basically we're talking about environmental changes, or environmental conditions select which traits survive. So let's look at how this works. Living organisms overproduce. What do we mean by overproduce? Well, exactly what it sounds like. More offspring are created that can possibly survive. More offspring are created than can survive. So here's a couple of examples here. Spiders, turtles. Everyone knows turtles mass produce. Some other examples are mice, rats, ants, bacteria, fruit flies, mosquitoes. All right, that's enough examples. There is variation among offspring. We learned this. What do we mean by variation? Offspring from the same parents are genetically different. Or parents, sorry, parents. So here you have a litter of pups. They all came from the same parents, but they're not exactly the same. Same thing with pigeons. This variation is caused by a couple of things. One is mutations, which we just learned about in the last unit. They will only affect evolution if they are in the sex cells. Remember, another word for sex cells is gametes. So they have to be in the sperm and egg in order to be passed on. Also, sexual reproduction. You know that meiosis creates gametes that are all different. And why are they all different? Well, because of genetic shuffling and crossing over. And that was from another unit. So that's why we get variation. genetic shuffling and crossing over. And I'm going to put equals variation here. All right, let's move on to page 9. There are not enough resources for all of these overproduced offspring, finite resources, so organisms begin to compete in a struggle for survival. Finite refers to final, okay? Meaning we will run out. Because each organism needs to find food and water. So if we overproduce, there may not be enough food, shelter, and mates if they want to reproduce and keep the species going. So they begin to compete for these things, and only the fittest will survive. Some organisms will have traits. Another word for traits is characteristics. That help them to compete better than others. So these traits are called adaptations. So some examples of adaptations are camouflage, blending in with your environment. That allows you to survive. See the grasshopper in the grass here? Maybe webbed feet, like ducks. Maybe longer beaks, depending on what kind of food you need to pick up. So those are just some examples of adaptations. Which brings us to survival of the fittest. Those organisms that are best adapted to a particular environment will be able to survive long enough to reproduce. This assures that positive traits, meaning adaptations, are passed to future generations, and the species evolves over time. Evolution, small changes over time, little bit by little bit. Natural selection, the environment selecting the most adapted organisms to survive. Okay, and that is it for lesson 1.